The glass conference room walls did nothing to muffle the sound of applause. I stood there, hands gripping the podium, watching the board members rise to their feet one by one. 25 years of dedication crystallized into a single, validating moment. "Record profits for the 7th consecutive quarter," announced Bernard Wells, the chairman of the board, his voice carrying over the applause. "Michael Porter has once again proven why the Advanced Manufacturing Division is the crown jewel of Meridian Technologies." I nodded, allowing myself a rare moment of pride as I gathered my presentation materials. The projections for the next quarter looked even better. The international expansion I'd championed for years was finally gaining traction. The strategic partnership with Patterson Industries, our largest client, had just been renewed for another 5 years. That was Tuesday. Today was Friday, and I was about to learn how quickly 25 years of loyalty could be erased. The email arrived at 4:47 p.m. I was in my office finalizing the strategic growth document that Richard Keller, our new CEO of just 3 months, had requested urgently that morning, meeting in my office. Now, that was all it said. No pleasantries, no context. Just 5 cold words from the man who'd replaced our retiring CEO, Martin Edwards, a leader I'd respected and worked alongside for nearly 2 decades. I stared at those 5 words, a strange heaviness settling in my chest. In 25 years. At Meridian Technologies, I'd received thousands of meeting requests. None had ever felt so ominous, Mr. Porter. My assistant Deborah stood in the doorway, concern evident on her face. "Are you all right?" "You look pale," I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Deb. Just another meeting with our new fearless leader." She didn't return the smile. In 18 years as my assistant, Deborah had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the corporate winds. I heard Ellen from accounting was called up there an hour ago. She came back to get her purse and left with a security escort. The heaviness in my chest expanded. Ellen had been with the company for 17 years. "I'm sure it's nothing," I said, not believing it for a second. "Probably just wants an update on the growth projections." I closed my laptop, straightened my tie, the same blue silk tie my wife Sarah had given me on our 20th anniversary, and smoothed down my jacket, little rituals of normality in what was beginning to feel like anything but a normal Friday afternoon. "Should I wait for you?" Deborah asked. "I can stay late if you need anything prepared after the meeting." "No need," I said, trying to inject confidence into my voice. "Go home to that husband of yours. I'll see you Monday." As I walked the familiar path to the executive suite on the top floor of Meridian Tower, I couldn't help but reflect on how much of my life had been spent within these walls. I'd been 37 when I was hired to salvage the struggling Advanced Manufacturing Division, a young executive with something to prove. Now, at 62, I had built that division into the company's primary profit center, expanding from a team of 12 to over 300 employees across 3 countries. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor, and immediately I sensed something was off. The usual buzz of activity was replaced by an unnatural quiet. Janet, the executive floor receptionist, who had always greeted me with a warm smile, kept her eyes fixed on her computer screen as I passed. As I approached Richard's office, I saw Marcy, his executive assistant, seated at her desk outside his door. She'd been my friend for 15 years, ever since I'd recommended her for the executive assistant pool. We'd shared lunches, birthday celebrations, and had seen each other. Through divorces, hers, and health scares, mine. Today she wouldn't meet my eyes. "He's waiting," she whispered, nodding toward the closed door. "Marcy, what's going on?" I kept my voice low. She finally looked up, and the sadness in her eyes confirmed what I'd begun to suspect the moment I received that terse email. "I'm so sorry, Michael." I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and knocked on the door. "Come in." Richard Keller's office had once belonged to Martin Edwards, but the similarities ended there. Martin's warm, cluttered space filled with photos, awards, and mementos from 40 years in the industry had been transformed into a minimalist showcase. Glass, chrome, and stark white walls. No personal photos, no evidence that the occupant had a life outside these walls or a career before his MBA from Wharton. Richard was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, back turned to the door, phone pressed to his ear. His custom Italian suit, which I knew cost more than what many of our employees made in a month, hung perfectly on his athletic frame. At 42, he was exactly 20 years my junior, a fact he seemed to emphasize with his frequent references to digital transformation and disrupting outdated business models. He didn't turn when I entered, just raised a finger in the universal gesture of wait, a small power play that didn't go unnoticed. "Yes, I understand the board's concerns," he was saying. "I'm handling it right now. You'll have the restructuring plan on your desk Monday morning." He ended the call and finally turned to face me. "Michael, take a seat." I remained standing. "What's this about, Richard?" His eyes, cool and assessing, flickered briefly with annoyance at my refusal to sit. "Please," he said, gesturing more firmly to the chair in front of his desk. I sat, feeling a strange hollowness expanding in my chest. Through the glass walls I could see other executives glancing nervously in our direction before quickly looking away. In that moment I knew, with absolute certainty, what was coming. "I'll get right to it," Richard said, settling into his ergonomic chair. "We're making changes to the leadership structure, effective immediately. Your position is being eliminated." The words hung in the air between us. Despite my suspicions, hearing it stated so bluntly was like a physical blow. I waited for more, some explanation, some acknowledgement of my contributions, some humanity. "You'll receive 6 months severance, and HR has prepared the standard package." He slid a folder across the desk. "I need your keycard and company devices before you leave today." I stared at the folder but didn't reach for it. My mind flashed back to Tuesday, just 3 days ago, when the board had given me a standing ovation. Now I was being discarded like outdated equipment. 25 years, I finally said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I built this division from nothing. Our numbers are stronger than they've ever been." Richard leaned back in his chair, maintaining the practiced neutral expression I'd seen him use in difficult negotiations. "This isn't about your performance, Michael. It's about the future direction of the company. We need fresh perspectives, innovative approaches. The board supports this decision." "The board?" I repeated. "The same board that had applauded when I delivered record profits, the same board that had approved my strategy for international expansion just 3 weeks ago. Your team will report to Alison, effective Monday." Alison Brooks, 33 years old, one of the consultants Richard had brought with him from his previous company. I'd spent the last 2 months trying to help her understand our manufacturing processes I had refined over decades. "And what exactly does Alison know about our manufacturing processes or our client relationships? Some of these clients have been with me for decades." I felt heat rising in my face, the first crack in my professional demeanor. Richard's expression, didn't change. "She'll figure it out. That's why we hired her." He glanced at his watch. "HR is waiting for you. They'll walk you through the exit process." I didn't move. "Did you plan this all along?" "Even while I was onboarding you, showing you everything I've built." For the first time, Richard looked uncomfortable, a slight crack in his polished facade. Business decisions aren't personal, Michael. I'm sure someone with your experience understands that. In that moment, the accumulation of 25 years, the missed family dinners, the postponed vacations, the weekends spent at my desk instead of with my children, the heart attack at 55 that my doctor attributed to stress, but that I had downplayed to keep my position secure. All of it crystallized into a clarity I had never experienced before. I stood up slowly, leaving the folder on his desk. Actually, Richard, in 25 years, I've learned that all business is personal. It's built on relationships, trust, and institutional knowledge, things you apparently don't value. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Good. I walked to the door, then turned back. One more thing. The Patterson contract renewal, the one you've been trying to salvage after you insulted their CEO at the charity gala? Richard's eyes narrowed. What about it? They only stayed because of their relationship with me. Good luck explaining to the board why you just lost a $14 million annual account. The look of alarm that flashed across his face was almost worth the humiliation of what was happening. Almost. I walked out, past Marcy's desk where a security guard, Kevin, who I'd personally approved for a hardship loan through the Employee Assistance Program last year, was already waiting to escort me out. News traveled fast in corporate America. The indignity of being escorted from the building I had helped build was not lost on me. I'm sorry about this, Mr. Porter, Kevin mumbled, as we waited for the elevator. Not your fault, Kevin, I said. How's your daughter doing? He looked surprised that I remembered. Much better. That surgery you helped us with. She's back in school now, I nodded. I'm glad to hear it. We rode the elevator down in silence. As the doors opened on my floor, soon to be my former floor, I saw the stunned faces of my team. Word had already spread. Some looked away quickly, others seemed on the verge of tears. Jim Kohlberg, who I'd hired fresh out of college 15 years ago and mentored to a senior position, took a step forward as if to speak, then stopped as the security guard moved closer to me. I gave Jim a small nod. He'd understand. This wasn't the time or place. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah, my wife of 34 years. Don't forget to pick up milk on your way home. Love you. The normalcy of it made me laugh, a short, sharp sound that startled the security guard. He wouldn't understand that after 25 years of building someone else's dream, I was just another problem to be solved, another line item to be removed from a spreadsheet. And life, ordinary, domestic life, continued regardless. The security guard escorted me to my office where Deborah stood waiting, her eyes red-rimmed. I told you to go home, I said gently. I couldn't leave you to do this alone, she replied, already beginning to organize the few personal items I kept in my otherwise utilitarian office. As I began clearing out my desk, I was acutely aware of colleagues watching from a distance, too uncomfortable or too afraid to approach. Years of friendships, mentorships, and professional relationships reduced to awkward glances and whispered conversations. Only Deborah moved freely around the office, efficiently packing photos of Sarah and our 2 children, Jennifer and David, both now adults with families of their own. She carefully wrapped the crystal award I'd received for 20 years of service, the fountain pen Martin had given me when I hit my first billion-dollar year, and the small wooden carving my grandson had made last Christmas. This is wrong, she whispered, her hands trembling slightly as she placed my things in a cardboard box that seemed woefully inadequate to contain a quarter-century of professional life. Everyone knows it. People are already talking about what this means for the company. It's just business, I said, echoing Richard's words with a bitterness I couldn't hide. It's not just business to me, Deborah said fiercely. or to any of us who've worked with you. You built this division. You fought for our jobs, our benefits." She lowered her voice. "Did he even thank you for everything you've done?" I shook, my head feeling a lump forming in my throat that I refused to acknowledge. 25 years in corporate America had taught me to compartmentalize emotions. Today would be no different. As I emptied my desk drawer, my hand closed around a small object, a smooth stone with the word perseverance etched into it. Martin had given it to me during my first year, when I was struggling to turn the division around and facing resistance at every turn. Sometimes, he had told me, success isn't about brilliance or innovation. Sometimes it's just about outlasting everyone else. I'd outlasted everyone except Richard Keller and his vision for the future of the company. I slipped the stone into my pocket, Mr. Porter. Kevin, the security guard, shifted uncomfortably by the door. "I hate to rush you, but they're waiting for you in HR." "Of course they are," I muttered. HR, the department I had worked with to create our industry-leading benefits package, the team I had defended during budget cuts. Now they were waiting for me to process my exit. I picked up the family photo from my desk, Sarah and I flanked by our children and 5 grandchildren at last year's Christmas gathering. So many of those holidays I had been only partially present, my mind still in the office, still solving problems, still building the division that had just been taken from me. "I'll carry this one myself," I told Deborah, carefully placing the frame in my briefcase. We walked through the open office space, past cubicles and conference rooms named after company values like integrity and commitment. I had helped choose those names during the office redesign 10 years ago, believing they reflected what Meridian Technologies stood for. The irony wasn't lost on me. The HR office was located on the 2nd floor, intentionally separated from the business units to maintain confidentiality. As we stepped off the elevator, Lisa Chen, the HR director, was waiting. I had advocated for her promotion 3 years ago. "Michael," she said, her professional mask firmly in place but strain evident around her eyes. "If you'll come with me, we can get this processed quickly." "I know the drill, Lisa," I said, following her into a small conference room where exit paperwork was already laid out. "Let's not pretend this is anything other than what it is." She flinched slightly but maintained her composure. "We've prepared the standard separation agreement. 6 months severance, continuation of health benefits for that period, and outplacement. Services if you want them." I skimmed the document, years of contract negotiations having trained me to spot the important clauses quickly. Non-disparagement, confidentiality, non-compete for 1 year, all pretty standard. I looked up at her. "Except the accelerated vesting of stock options is missing." Lisa had the grace to look embarrassed. "Richard felt that since you're receiving 6 months of severance, the accelerated vesting wasn't necessary." I did the mental calculation quickly. Without accelerated vesting, I would lose approximately $750,000 in options that were set to vest over the next year, options I had earned through growing the company's market value. "I see," I said, keeping my voice level. "And I assume the board approved this deviation from our executive separation policy?" Lisa shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't in that discussion." Of course she wasn't. Richard would have handled that directly with the compensation committee, probably the same day they were giving me a standing ovation for record profits. I picked up the pen, hesitated, then put it down again. "I'll have my lawyer review this before I sign anything." "Michael," Lisa began, her voice taking on a pleading tone, "if you don't sign today, we can't process your first severance payment until—" "I understand the implications, Lisa," I interrupted, my tone sharper than I intended. 25 years of financial prudence meant I could afford to wait for my lawyer's review. Many of my colleagues wouldn't have had that luxury. "I'll have my lawyer contact you next week," she nodded, gathering the unsigned papers. "I'll walk you out." The security guard hovered nearby as I placed my keycard on Lisa's desk and handed over my laptop and company phone. 25 years of work contained in a single cardboard box that Deborah insisted on carrying for me, tears now flowing freely down her face. "This isn't goodbye," I told her as we approached the lobby. "We'll have lunch next week. I want to hear all the gossip." She attempted a smile. "I'll call you." We both knew she probably wouldn't, not because she didn't want to, but because the unwritten rules of corporate separations made continued contact uncomfortable for those left behind. They would wonder if she was sharing internal information, if her loyalty was in question. Richard's type of leadership thrived on such insecurities. The lobby of Meridian Tower was a soaring glass atrium I had helped design during the headquarters renovation. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows, illuminating the company logo, a stylized M that represented innovation and stability. According to the branding consultants, we had paid a small fortune. As I walked through the space for what might be the last time, I noticed several employees quickly averting their gaze, but others, mostly from my division, approached despite the security guard's presence. Jim Kohlberg reached me first. "This is bullshit, Michael," he said, his voice low but intense. "Half the team is ready to walk." "Don't," I said firmly. "You got a family to support. This isn't worth throwing away your career. But what you built here will survive or it won't," I finished for him. "That's no longer my concern." The words felt foreign in my mouth, like I was reading from someone else's script. For 25 years, the success of this division had been my primary concern, often at the expense of everything else. Linda from project management was next, quickly pressing a business card into my hand. "My husband's law firm," she whispered. "They specialize in wrongful termination. Call them." I pocketed the card, touched by her gesture but knowing I had no interest in a prolonged legal battle. At 62, I had other priorities to consider. I finally reached the revolving doors that led to the outside world. My phone buzzed again. An email from Richard. "Michael, I forgot to mention the NDA in your severance package prohibits discussing company matters with clients. This includes Patterson Industries. Please acknowledge receipt." I stepped out into the bright spring afternoon, the contrast between the climate-controlled corporate environment and the natural world momentarily disorienting. The parking lot stretched before me, filled with the cars of employees still at their desks, still believing their dedication would protect them when the next restructuring came. And I started laughing, a real laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. Richard didn't know what I knew. He didn't know that Thomas Patterson and I had been college roommates at Northwestern. He didn't know that I was godfather to Thomas's daughter, Elizabeth. He didn't know that the Patterson contract had a key person clause that I had insisted on years ago, which meant they could terminate without penalty if I left the company. He also didn't know that I had taken Thomas and his wife Diane to dinner just last week, where I had casually mentioned rumors of organizational changes at Meridian. Thomas had immediately understood the implications. "If they're stupid enough to let you go," he had said, "we'll be taking our business elsewhere." I deleted Richard's email without responding and called Thomas as I walked to my car, still laughing. "Is it true?" Thomas answered without preamble. "Afraid. So?" I replied, unlocking my car with the remote. "Just got escorted out by security. Very dramatic." "Those idiots," Thomas muttered. "I told you 3 months ago when they brought in that MBA hotshot that it was going to be a disaster." He had indeed warned me. So had Sarah. So had Martin, who had been pushed into early retirement to make way for Richard's fresh perspective. "Well, it's done now," I said, sliding into the driver's seat of my 5-year-old Lexus. Richard drove a Tesla, another detail he had made sure everyone noticed. "How's Elizabeth doing with the wedding planning?" "Don't change the subject, Michael. I'm calling our legal team today. The key person clause is crystal clear. If you're out, we can terminate without penalty." I started the car but didn't pull out of my parking space. For a moment, I sat there looking at the Meridian Tower, 60 floors of glass and steel that had been my professional home for 25 years. I had arrived before the sun most mornings and left long after dark. I had missed school plays and soccer games. I had postponed anniversaries and vacations. I had answered emails from hospital beds. And now, at 62, I was sitting in the parking lot as a former employee, contemplating whether I should use my relationship with our biggest client to inflict maximum damage on the company that had just discarded me. The corporate warrior in me, the ambitious young executive who had sacrificed so much for professional success, wanted retribution. But the man I had become over those 25 years, the man who had learned the hard way about what truly matters, hesitated. "Let me think about it, Thomas," I said finally. "This just happened. I need some time to process." "What's there to process?" Thomas demanded. "They just showed you exactly how much they value 25 years of loyalty. None of this, it's not personal, it's business crap. Business is always personal." I smiled at the echo of my own words to Richard. "I know, but I built that division from the ground up. There are 300 people whose livelihoods depend on it. I need to consider what's best for everyone," Thomas sighed. "Always the diplomat, Michael. Fine, think about it. But know that we're ready to walk whenever you say the word. The contract may be with Meridian, but our relationship is with you." I thanked him and ended the call, finally pulling out of my parking space. As I drove past the security gate for what might be the final time, the guard, an older man who had been with the company almost as long as I had, gave me a solemn nod. Word travelled fast indeed. The drive home was surreal. For 25 years I had made this same 30-minute commute, my mind always racing with projects, problems and strategies. Today I found myself noticing details I had overlooked for years: the changing spring foliage along the highway, the new coffee shop on the corner near our neighborhood, the children playing in the park that Sarah often mentioned walking through. Sarah. How would I tell her? What would this mean for our retirement plans, our future? The financial impact was significant but not devastating thanks to years of careful planning. But the psychological impact, losing the identity I had built over a quarter century, that was harder to calculate. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Sarah working in the garden she had lovingly cultivated over the decades we had lived in this house. She looked up at the sound of the car, surprise and then concern crossing her face as she registered the early hour of my return and the cardboard box visible on the passenger seat. I turned off the engine but remained sitting there, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the day's events. 25 years. Gone in a 15-minute meeting. Sarah approached the car, wiping her hands on her gardening apron. I rolled down the window. "You're home early," she said, her eyes taking in my expression, the box, the unsigned separation papers on top of it. After 34 years of marriage, words were sometimes unnecessary. "Richard fired me," I said simply. She reached through the window, taking my hand in hers. Her skin was warm from the spring sun, dirt embedded under her fingernails from tending to the perennials I had too often been too busy to appreciate. "Oh, Michael," she said softly. "I'm so sorry." 25 years, I said, my voice finally cracking. "And it was over in 15 minutes. Sarah squeezed my hand. "Come inside. I'll make some tea." I didn't sign their severance agreement, I told her, as if this detail was somehow the most important. I'm going to have Alan look at it first. Good, she said firmly. Don't sign anything today. She opened the car door. Come inside, Michael. The company will still be there tomorrow. I looked at her sharply, startled by her practical perspective when my emotions were so raw. She gave me a sad smile. What? You think I haven't seen this coming since they brought in that arrogant young CEO? Martin warned you, I warned you. This is exactly what these types do. They come in, dismantle what's working, claim credit for short-term gains, and leave before the long-term damage becomes apparent. I stared at her, once again reminded that while I had been immersed in the corporate world, Sarah had been observing it with the clarity of an outsider who didn't have her identity wrapped up in organizational charts and quarterly profits. Thomas wants to invoke the key person clause, I said, finally getting out of the car. Cancel their contract. Sarah considered this as she helped me gather my belongings. Is that what you want? To burn it all down on your way out? The question caught me off guard. Was that what I wanted? Part of me, the part that was still reeling from the shock and humiliation, absolutely wanted to see Richard scrambling to explain the loss of our biggest client. But another part, the part that had mentored dozens of young professionals now rising through the ranks at Meridian, hesitated. I don't know, I admitted. I built that division. Those people are like family. Sarah nodded, understanding. Then take some time before you decide. This just happened. You don't have to figure everything out today. As we walked into the house that had often felt more like a hotel to me than a home, a place to sleep and shower before returning to the office, I was struck by how little of myself existed here. Sarah's touches were everywhere. Her books, her art, her garden visible through the windows, but where was I in this space? A few business awards on the shelf in the study, a collection of business books I had rarely had time to read. I set the box down on the kitchen counter, the physical representation of my corporate life, looking pathetically small in our warm, lived-in home. Sarah put the kettle on and pulled out 2 mugs. What did he say? Richard? Did he at least acknowledge everything you've contributed? I gave a hollow laugh. He said it wasn't personal, just the future direction of the company. I leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. He had a security guard waiting before I even entered his office, Sarah, like I was a criminal. Her expression hardened, a rare look from my normally gentle wife. What are you going to do about the severance agreement? There must be some room for negotiation. They're trying to withhold the accelerated vesting of my stock options. It's against company policy, but... I shrugged. Apparently the rules are different when Richard makes the decisions. How much are we talking about? About 750,000. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she remained calm. Alan will sort that out. That's why we pay him the big legal fees. She poured the boiling water into the mugs. You know,
Michael, as horrible as this is, maybe it's also an opportunity.
I looked at her quizzically. An opportunity for what? She handed me a mug of tea. To figure out who Michael Porter is outside of Meridian Technologies. To do all those things we've been postponing for someday. To finally spend time with our grandchildren without checking your email every 5 minutes. I started to object, then stopped myself. How many times had I promised to be more present, to focus on our family, only to be pulled back into work emergencies and corporate demands? How many times had Sarah supported my career while putting her own interests aside? I don't know who I am without that job, I admitted softly. I do, Sarah said, placing her hand on my cheek. You're the man I fell in love with at Northwestern. The one who used to talk about making a difference, not just making profits. The one who wanted to teach someday to mentor young people. She smiled. You're my husband, Jennifer and David's father, and a grandfather who has a lot of lost time to make up for. I covered her hand with mine, feeling the first genuine warmth since receiving that email at 4:47 p.m. When did you get so wise? I've had 34 years to practice while you were busy running the world, she teased gently. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. That could be important, Sarah said. For the first time in 25 years, it's not my problem anymore. The realization was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from our mugs, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. I found myself telling Sarah everything: Richard's coldness, Marcy's sadness, Deborah's tears, the humiliation of being escorted out, the concern of colleagues who risked approaching me despite the security guard. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently, I said, staring into my mug. If I had played the political game better with Richard, if I'd been more aggressive in defending my territory. Stop, Sarah interrupted firmly. This isn't about what you did or didn't do. This is about a new CEO wanting to put his stamp on the company. Consequences be damned. You know how these cycles work. The board brings in someone new, they clean house, they implement their vision, and 3 years later, when it's all falling apart, they move on to their next 7-figure salary while someone else cleans up the
mess. I smiled despite myself. Sarah had always seen through the corporate theatre more clearly than I had. So what now? I asked, suddenly feeling adrift. For 25 years, my days had been structured around meetings, objectives, deliverables.
Tomorrow morning there would be nothing. First, you call Alan, Sarah said practically. Get that severance agreement sorted. Then you take some time. Really take it, Michael. Don't jump into anything new. She hesitated. Maybe we could
take that trip to Italy we've been talking about since Jennifer's wedding.
Italy. The Tuscan villa we had booked and cancelled 3 times due to work emergencies. Always postponing, always prioritizing the company over our own dreams. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. My phone buzzed again. This time I checked it. A text from Jim Kohlberg. The team wants to take you to dinner tonight. No agenda, just want to say goodbye properly. Please say yes. I showed it to Sarah. You should go, she said. They need closure as much as you do. I nodded, typing a quick response accepting the invitation. The thought of facing my team, now former team, was both comforting and painful. My phone immediately buzzed with another message. This one from Richard. Michael, please acknowledge receipt of my previous email regarding the NDA and Patterson Industries. Sarah read it over my shoulder. He's worried, she said with satisfaction. He should be, I replied, deleting the message without responding. Patterson represents almost 20% of the division's revenue. Are you going to tell Thomas to pull the contract? I considered the question carefully. Not yet. I want to see what Richard does next. If he's smart, he'll reach out to discuss a consulting arrangement to maintain the relationship. If he's as arrogant as I think he is, he'll assume Alison can
handle it. And if he does reach out? I smiled, feeling a strange sense of power for the first time that day. Then I'll name my price, and it will include full vesting of those stock options.
Sarah laughed, a genuine, warm sound that filled the kitchen. There's the Michael Porter I married, always 3 steps ahead. For the first time since receiving that email, I felt something close to optimism. Not because I expected to get my job back. That chapter was closed. But because I was beginning to see possibilities beyond the walls of Meridian Tower. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The doorbell rang. Sarah went to answer it while I remained at the table, still processing the day's events. She returned, followed by David, our son, still in his hospital scrubs. At 32, he was an emergency room doctor at County General, following his own path far from the corporate world I had inhabited. "Mom called me," he said, his expression concerned as he surveyed me. "Are you okay, Dad?" I stood to embrace him, surprised by the sudden emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. "I'm fine. Just an unexpected career change." David pulled back to look at me skeptically. "After 25 years? That's not a career change. That's an amputation." I winced at the apt medical metaphor. "I suppose it is." "David," Sarah admonished gently, "your father's had a difficult day." "It's okay," I assured her. "He's right. It does feel like losing a limb." David sat at the table with us. "So what happened?" I gave him the abbreviated version, finding it slightly easier to tell the second.
"Time. Let me get this straight," David said when I'd finished. "This new CEO fires you 3 days after you deliver record profits and he thinks there won't be consequences. Does he know about your relationship with Patterson?" "Apparently not," I said. "Or he doesn't think it matters."
David shook his head in disbelief. "Corporate America, this is why I chose medicine. At least when I get fired, it'll be because I killed someone, not because I made the hospital too much money." Despite everything, I laughed. David had always had a way of cutting through pretense. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. "Take some time, figure things out." I looked at Sarah. "Maybe finally take that trip to Italy." David's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously, you're actually going to leave the country without your laptop?" "I didn't say that," I protested. Sarah and David exchanged knowing looks. "One step at a time," Sarah said diplomatically. The glass walls of the conference room did nothing to muffle the sound of applause. I stood there, hands clasped on the podium, watching as the board members rose one by one. 25 years of dedication crystallized in a single moment of validation. "Record profits for the 7th consecutive quarter," announced Bernard Wells, the chairman of the board, his voice booming above the applause. "Michael Porter has demonstrated once again why the Advanced Manufacturing Division is the crown jewel of Meridian Technologies." I nodded, allowing myself a rare moment of pride as I acknowledged my presentation materials. The projections for the next quarter looked even better. The international expansion I had championed for years was finally gaining traction. The strategic partnership with Patterson Industries, our largest client, had just been renewed for another 5 years. That was on Tuesday. Today was Friday, and I was about to learn how quickly 25 years of loyalty can be erased. The email arrived at 4:47 p.m. I was in my office, finalizing the strategic growth document that Richard Keller, our new CEO of barely 3 months, had urgently requested. That morning, "Meeting in my office, now." That was all it said. No pleasantries, no context. Just 5 cold words from the man who had replaced our retiring CEO, Martin Edwards, a leader I had respected and worked with for nearly 2 decades. I stared at those 5 words, feeling a strange heaviness settle in my chest. In 25 years, or say, Meridian Technologies, I had received thousands of meeting requests. None had ever felt so ominous. "Mr. Porter?" My assistant, Deborah, stood in the doorway, concern evident on her face. "Are you okay? You look pale." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Deb. Just another meeting with our fearless new leader." She didn't smile back. In 18 years as my assistant, Deborah had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the corporate winds. "I heard Ellen from accounting was called there an hour ago." She went back to get her bag and left with a security escort. The heaviness in my chest expanded. Ellen had been with the firm for 17 years. "I'm sure it's nothing," I said, not believing it for a second. "She probably just wants an update on growth projections." I closed my laptop, straightened my tie, the same blue silk tie my wife, Sarah, had given me for our 20th anniversary, and smoothed down my jacket. Small rituals of normalcy in what was beginning to feel like anything but a normal Friday afternoon. "Should you expect him?" Deborah asked. "I can stay late if you need me to prepare something after the meeting." "No need," I said, trying to inject confidence into my voice. "Go home with that husband of yours. See you Monday." As I walked down the familiar path toward the executive suite on the top floor of the Meridian Tower, I couldn't help but reflect on how much of my life had been spent within these walls. I was 37 when I was hired to rescue the struggling advanced manufacturing division, a young executive with something to prove. Now at 62, I had turned that division into the company's primary profit center, expanding from a team of 12 to more than 300 employees in 3 countries. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor, and I immediately sensed something wasn't right. The usual buzz of activity had been replaced by an unnatural silence. Janet, the executive floor receptionist, who had always greeted me with a warm smile, kept her eyes fixed on her computer screen as I passed. As I approached Richard's office, I saw Marcy, his executive assistant, sitting at her desk outside his door. She'd been my friend for 15 years, ever since I'd recommended her for the executive assistant group. We'd shared lunches, celebrated birthdays, and supported each other through divorces, hers, and health scares, mine. Today she didn't want to meet my eyes. "She's waiting," she whispered, nodding toward the closed door. "Marcy, what's going on?" I kept my voice low. She finally looked up, and the sadness in her eyes confirmed that I'd been suspicious the moment she'd received that terse email. "I'm so sorry, Michael." I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and knocked on the door. "Come in." Richard Keller's office once belonged to Martin Edwards, but the similarities ended there. Martin's warm, cluttered space. I set the box down on the kitchen counter, the physical representation of my corporate life, looking pathetically small in our warm, lived-in home. Sarah put the kettle on and pulled out 2 mugs. "What did he say, Richard?" Did he at least acknowledge?
"Everything you've contributed?" I gave a hollow laugh. "He said it wasn't personal, just the future direction of the company." I leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted.
"He had a security guard waiting before I even entered his office, Sarah, like I was a criminal." Her expression hardened, a rare look from my normally gentle wife. "What are you going to do about the severance agreement? There must be some room for negotiation. They're trying to withhold the accelerated vesting of my stock options. It's against company policy, but—" I shrugged. Apparently the rules are different when Richard makes the decisions. "How much are we talking about?" "About 750,000. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she remained calm. "Alan will sort that out. That's why we pay him the big legal fees." She poured the boiling water into the mugs. "You know—"
"Michael, as horrible as this is, maybe it's also an opportunity."
I looked at her quizzically. "An opportunity for what?" She handed me a mug of tea. "To figure out who Michael Porter is outside of Meridian Technologies. To do all those things we've been postponing for someday. To finally spend time with our grandchildren without checking your email every 5 minutes." I started to object, then stopped myself. How many times had I promised to be more present, to focus on our family, only to be pulled back into work emergencies and corporate demands? How many times had Sarah supported my career while putting her own interests aside? "I don't know who I am without that job," I admitted softly. "I do," Sarah said, placing her hand on my cheek. "You're the man I fell in love with at Northwestern. The one who used to talk about making a difference, not just making profits. The one who wanted to teach someday, to mentor young people." She smiled. "You're my husband, Jennifer and David's father, and a grandfather who has a lot of lost time to make up for." 3 weeks passed in a blur. I moved through the stages of grief like they were stations on a commuter train. Denial as I woke up at 5 a.m. out of habit. Anger as I cancelled the vacation I'd planned to celebrate my 25th anniversary with the company. Bargaining as I reviewed my severance package with my lawyer. Depression as I realized how much of my identity had been wrapped up in my job. I was somewhere between depression and acceptance when Richard's calls began. The first one came exactly 22 days after my termination. I was sitting in my home office, half-heartedly updating my resume for the first time in decades, when my phone lit up with his name. I let it go to voicemail. "Michael, this is Richard Keller. We need to discuss the Patterson situation. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." I deleted it without a second thought and went back to my resume. The second call came 2 hours later. Again, I ignored it. The voicemail was less composed. "Michael, Patterson is threatening to pull their contract. I need to understand what happened. Call me immediately." I texted Thomas, "Richard reaching out about your contract. What did you tell him?" Thomas replied almost instantly that we'd be happy to continue our relationship with Meridian under your leadership. Otherwise, we'll be exploring other options. The third call from Richard came the next morning. This time, there was a distinct note of panic in his voice. "Michael, please. The board is asking questions. Patterson represents 18% of our annual
revenue. We need to resolve this." I finally texted him back. "Per my severance agreement, I'm prohibited from discussing company matters.
Best of luck." The text messages started then, urgent, increasingly desperate. "Can we meet for coffee, just to talk? The board is calling an emergency meeting. I need your insight. What if we brought you back as a consultant? Name your price." Each message made me laugh harder than the last. I showed them to Sarah, my wife of 30 years, who had watched me pour my life into Meridian Technologies while postponing our dreams. "He's desperate," she said, refilling my coffee mug. "What are you gonna do?" I looked around our kitchen at the retirement brochures we'd been collecting for years, but never had time to seriously consider, at the calendar marked with doctor's appointments I'd previously been too busy to schedule, at my wife's hopeful expression. "Nothing," I said finally. "I'm going to do absolutely nothing." The following week brought more calls, more messages. Richard offered consulting fees that made even Sarah raise her eyebrows. The board chair called personally, apologizing for the misunderstanding and suggesting we clear the air. But something had changed in me. The frantic pace that had defined my existence for 25 years had slowed. I was sleeping past 5 a.m. I was having breakfast with my wife. I was calling my adult children in the middle of the day just to chat. Then came the email from Alison Brooks, my replacement. "Michael, I'm struggling with the Patterson account and several others. The systems you built are more complex than they appeared. Could we possibly meet? I'd be grateful for any guidance." I read it twice, then forwarded it to Thomas, who responded with a single laughing emoji. The final call from Richard came exactly 6 weeks after my termination. I was at my daughter's house, playing with my 1-year-old grandson, something I'd rarely had time for before. This time, I answered. "Michael," Richard sounded exhausted. "Thank you for picking up. I have about 2 minutes," I said, watching my grandson stack blocks with intense concentration. The board asked for my resignation this morning. Patterson pulled their contract, and 4 other major clients are threatening to follow. The quarterly projections are not good. I said nothing. They've asked me to offer you your position back, with a substantial raise and a seat on the board. He paused. I was wrong, Michael. I didn't understand what you'd built here. My grandson knocked over his tower of blocks and laughed with pure delight, starting again immediately. That's a generous offer, I said, but I'm afraid I've accepted another position. Where? Richard sounded genuinely shocked. Life, I said simply. I'm finally working at living my life, Richard, and the benefits are excellent. After I hung
up, my daughter gave me a questioning look. Was that work? She asked, used to my calls being interrupted by urgent business matters.
No, I said, getting down on the floor to help build a new tower. That was just someone learning a very expensive lesson. The following week, I received a formal offer letter from Meridian's board. The salary was eye-watering, the title impressive. I filed it away without responding. Instead, I finalized the paperwork for the small consulting firm I was starting with 3 former colleagues who had quit Meridian in solidarity. Our first client, Patterson Industries, of course. In the evenings, Sarah and I began seriously planning the European trip we'd been postponing for 20 years. During the days, I took calls from other former clients who had heard I was available. We worked, when we wanted to, with clients who valued relationships and expertise over cost-cutting and strategic realignment. 3 months after being escorted from the building I had helped build, I ran into Marcy, Richard's former assistant, at a coffee shop. Meridian's a mess, she said, stirring her latte. They brought in some new hotshot from a tech company, but the damage is done. Everyone's updating their resumes. That's unfortunate, I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I had loved that company. Was it worth it? She asked suddenly. All those years? I thought about the question carefully. Parts of it were. I built something meaningful. I learned a lot. But I wish I had realized sooner that the company's loyalty would never match mine. My phone buzzed with a text. A photo from Sarah of our new passports arrived that morning for our upcoming trip. I showed it to Marcy, who smiled. So what now? Now? I laughed, a genuine laugh without bitterness for the first time in months. Now I'm building something new, but this time I'm making sure the foundation includes a life outside of work. As I walked out of the coffee shop, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Richard. Any chance you'd consider coming back? Even part-time, the new CEO is asking. I deleted it without responding and called Sarah instead. We had dinner reservations to make and flights to book. After 25 years of putting work first, I finally understood that the most urgent messages were the ones I'd been ignoring all along, the call to actually live my life.